So little grandma's yahrzeit is coming up. It will be 20 years since my dad's mom passed away. And growing up, my sisters and I had big grandma and little grandma. My mom's mom was known as big grandma, and my dad's mom was little grandma. Of course, it was related to their relative size to each other, but by the time I had gotten my driver's license, I was taller than each of them. But the names held. Toby, little grandma's actual name, was quite a person. Actually, Matilda was her actual name, but nobody called her that. And she was a joy, a bundle of energy, and a constant source of fun for the grandkids. By the time I was in middle school, she lived near us, and so I got to see my grandparents weekly, and often many times a week. Her childhood was rough. Stories of growing up in an orphanage in New York, running away, and then being brought back to the orphanage. She learned to be scrappy and resilient in her childhood. And I never knew little grandma as a married person. She was widowed by the time I came onto the scene. Grandpa Harry had died the year before I was born, and she never remarried. But there are legendary stories of little grandma from those days. As she was reorienting herself after Harry died, she decided to travel throughout Europe by herself. One of the stories she liked to share was about arriving in Rome and befriending a group of nuns. And apparently, she stayed with the nuns for some time, and they showed her around Rome, and she always told it as just an incredible, exotic adventure. It was extraordinary, and I could imagine her befriending the nuns in the strange city. Little grandma made friends wherever she went. In my teenage years, she would go to a bakery on Burlingame Avenue, Copenhagen Bakery it was called, and she would order a Danish and a coffee that had to be half decaf, half regular, plus cream. This was far before the Starbucks culture of hyper-particular ordering, so I used to think that her specialty brew was wonderfully eccentric. And then we would talk about all the things grandkids and devoted grandparents would talk about, movies and books and friends and plans and family. And she always had an eye to the side, though, just over my shoulder or around me. She was constantly scanning the bakery for a mom with a stroller or a dad with a small hand clasping his own. Little grandma was always ready to talk with children. She loved kids. Her purse had a ready supply of candy and balloons prepared to give to children who strolled into her orbit. And remember, there was a different concern about choking hazards back then. Little grandma shared her joy of life with everyone and anyone. When we were young and would complain about something being boring, she would lecture us that if we were bored, we were not being creative enough in finding something interesting to do. After all, and this is what she would say, the only thing in life that is boring is flossing your teeth. And you have to do that anyway. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote a book titled Celebrating Life, Finding Happiness in Unexpected Places. He bookends one of his pieces like this. He begins, "There is an art of happiness. It has very little to do with how much money you have or how much fame, power, or success you enjoy." And then Sacks concludes his piece, "There is an art of happiness. It has something to do with striving, with ideals, with moral principle. And it has to do with the moments when we relax that striving and take pleasure in what we are and what we have." little grandma became a Renaissance master of the art of happiness. As little grandma grew older, my aunt moved from New York to California to take care of her more. They lived together near my parents for about a decade, and it seemed to work well. As little grandma needs increased, her daughter, my aunt, was right there to adjust. As dementia took hold, the adjustments were subtle at first, and then not subtle at all. Dementia is hard to witness, and I imagine equally hard to experience. Alzheimer's and dementia are cruel conditions. Filters disappear, memories disappear, identities dissipate. Rabbi Steve Glazer introduced me to a book that he was the editor on. It is titled Seasons of Caring, Meditations for Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregivers. Here's a short reflection from the book titled Transitions. Dad loved fences and gates. He enjoyed building them, painting them, and mending them. He was a man of boundaries and demarcations, maintaining that part for which he was responsible. He never let anything fall into disrepair. Never, that is, until dementia set in. The garden gate had come off its hinges. Perhaps he didn't notice. I suspect he did, but knew he couldn't make the repairs himself. So I got out the tools and I did the job, letting him assist. This was a transition. I had always been the holder of the plank for Dad to do the nailing. Transitions can make for an awkward dance as we assume the lead from the one who falters, make a home out of a new and unfamiliar surrounding, or take away the car keys. When facing transitions, we must become fence menders, shoring up the self of the one we love, helping them to maintain awareness of who they are in the midst of change and loss. This, in turn, enables reciprocal relationship, and love flows back and forth through the open gate. Alzheimer's and dementia are unkind. Watching a loved one fade away little by little is brutal. Too often, family members feel alone going through this. Maybe it is the burden of the caregiving, but being part of this community means you do not have to be alone. Being part of Bethel is being part of a community which has carried similar burdens, similar experiences of loss after incremental loss after incremental loss as the condition progresses. Being part of Bethel means you can lean on others. Eventually, little grandma's needs became too much, and my parents moved her to the Hebrew home in San Francisco. I remember visiting residents there as a kid. Our religious school class would go to deliver cards to residents and sing holiday songs. And now I would visit my little grandma when I was home from the East Coast. I would roll her wheelchair into the coffee shop on site, and she would order a Danish, and I would make her the special half-calf coffee she preferred. Sometimes there would be other visitors there with a grandchild or great-grandchild, prompting her to slide over to pinch a cheek or share a wide smile. She didn't have balloons or candy to hand out anymore. I have a few photos of her enjoying the company of her own great-grandson on a trip in which Ben came along with me. It has been 20 years since she passed away. We buried her alongside her husband down in the Los Angeles area. And little grandma is still reminding me of the importance of love and laughter. She is reminding me of the need for lightheartedness even in the midst of difficulty. She is reminding me of resilience in the face of obstacles. And maybe little grandma can remind you of that as well. Shabbat Shalom.